Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're zooming in on literally one of the most dramatic, game-changing periods in global sports history. We're talking about Manchester United's totally monumental 1992-1993 season. You know, their modern era of absolute total dominance. It wasn't actually inevitable. Not at all. It was born out of a massive, systemic revolution in English football, a frankly disastrous start to a shiny new league, and the arrival of a uniquely transformative player. Let's just dive right in.
26. Now, this isn't just a random number. For Manchester United fans at the time, this represented a literal generation of heartbreak. For 26 agonizing years, they had waited to win an English league title. We're talking about entire childhoods coming and going without fans ever seeing their beloved team lift that top trophy. They'd gotten close, sure, but the championship had painfully eluded them for over 2.5 decades.
So that brings us to a huge question. How did a newly formed league completely change their destiny? Because look, United didn't just break their 26-year curse out of nowhere. They did it during the absolute ground zero moment of modern football. To really get how massive this turnaround was, we need to step back and look at what was happening to English football right before this explosive moment.
Which brings us to Section 1, Football's Darkest Days.
Throughout the late 1980s, English football had basically hit rock bottom. I mean, it was grim. We're talking crumbling stadiums that were literally falling apart, genuinely terrible facilities for the fans, and rampant hooliganism that was heavily staining the sport's reputation worldwide. And it gets worse. After the tragic Heysel Stadium disaster in 1985, English clubs were entirely banned from European competitions for 5 whole years. The First Division, which had been the absolute pinnacle of English football since 1888, was lagging embarrassingly far behind leagues like Italy's Serie A and Spain's La Liga. We're talking way behind in both revenue and attendances. It was so bad that top English players were actually packing up and leaving the country to play abroad.
So, how did we get out of this mess? Well, following the devastating Hillsborough disaster, the government issued the Taylor Report in 1990, which essentially mandated that all major stadiums upgrade to become all-seater venues. But here's the catch. That was going to be incredibly expensive. The clubs desperately needed a massive injection of cash just to rebuild their basic infrastructure. And that's when a total paradigm shift happened. The top clubs realized that to fund these huge upgrades and ever hope to compete on a global stage again, they literally needed to tear up the rulebook and entirely restructure how television rights and revenues were distributed. Basically, they needed a revolution.
All right, let's move to Section 2, the Premier League breakaway.
£304 million. Let that sink in for a second. This staggeringly huge figure represents the broadcasting revolution that honestly changed the sport forever. In May 1992, the Breakaway League signed a massive 5-year television rights deal with Sky and the BBC, valued at $304 million. At the time, there was no way you'd see numbers like that. It was literally the largest agreement in the entire history of British sport. It was an absolute game changer, suddenly flooding the top clubs with unprecedented, truly transformative wealth.
So what exactly was this new entity? The FA Premier League was, at its core, a breakaway competition. Back in the summer of 1991, top-flight clubs signed what was called the Founder Members Agreement. This effectively meant they were leaving the historic Football League that had been running things since 1888. 22 clubs broke away specifically to capitalize on that incredibly lucrative television deal we just talked about. Now, they did keep the whole promotion and relegation system with the lower leagues, but financially, they were suddenly operating in a completely different stratosphere. The stage was perfectly set for a shiny, highly commercialized new era of football.
Moving right along to Section 3, a disastrous start.
Now, you'd probably think Manchester United, stepping into this wealthy new era, would just burst out of the gates, right? Well, actually, their start to the Premier League was nothing short of agonizing. On the very first weekend in August 1992, they didn't just lose, they actually conceded the very first goal in Premier League history. Yikes. And it didn't get much better. By autumn, after managing to overcome an initial really bad spell, they were still totally struggling for consistency. They had slipped all the way down to mid-table by November. They just couldn't score goals, and honestly, the sheer pressure of that 26-year drought was completely suffocating the team. They desperately needed a turning point.
I want to take a quick detour to look at that opening day loss, because it's just such a fantastic piece of football history. Manchester United had traveled away to play Sheffield United. Now, Sheffield was a gritty team that had barely even survived relegation in the years prior. In fact, during a fan protest earlier on, their manager Dave Bassett famously grabbed a literal police loudhailer in the car park and shouted to the crowd, "I'm staying here, Dino's going nowhere." He was talking about his star striker, Brian Deane.
And the dramatic irony here is just absolutely perfect. 5 minutes into this brand new, super wealthy, highly commercialized Premier League season, the first goal wasn't scored by some high-profile superstar from the wealthy elite. Nope. It was scored by Brian Deane, a guy Sheffield United had signed for just £40,000 from Doncaster a few years earlier. Deane just reacted quicker than the entire United defense and planted a header right past Peter Schmeichel. So the scoring in this new league of the haves was literally kickstarted by the have-nots. And man, it sent Manchester United into a total early season tailspin.
Section 4. The Cantona Catalyst.
Okay, so how on earth did they recover from this mid-table mediocrity to actually win the whole league? Well, they needed a catalyst. And wow, what a catalyst they found. In late November of 1992, manager Alex Ferguson signed French striker Eric Cantona over from reigning champions Leeds United. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a tactical signing, it was deeply psychological. Cantona brought this incredible swagger, a certain arrogance, and a pure creative genius that radically overnight transformed the team's fortunes. He provided the exact spark they desperately needed to finally break the mental shackles of that 26-year wait.
2. Just 2. That is the astonishingly low number of league games Manchester United lost after Eric Cantona joined the squad that late November. It's absolutely crazy. He was literally the missing puzzle piece. With him out there on the pitch, the team just went on these massive, long, unbeaten runs, completely flipping the dynamic of the title race and relentlessly hunting down all the teams ahead of them.
Which brings us to our final act. Section 5, ending the 26-year wait. So, fun fact, Norwich City actually led the table for most of the first half of the season, and Aston Villa fought them tooth and nail the whole way. But by the end, the sheer dominance of Manchester United's ultimate victory is just undeniable. Once they really found their gear, they didn't just scrape by and win, they secured the title by a massive 10-point margin over Aston Villa. That brutal 26-year curse was finally, absolutely, emphatically broken.
But how did they build something so strong to break that curse? It wasn't just Cantona doing everything. United built this incredible core foundation that perfectly mixed hardened, experienced veterans with dynamic, explosive youth. You had absolute leaders like Brian Robson and Steve Bruce anchoring the back, total warriors like Paul Ince and Mark Hughes fighting in the middle, the magical catalyst Cantona up front, and of course, bursting onto the scene was Ryan Biggs, who ended up winning the PFA Young Player of the Year for the second year running. This exact perfect blend of talent officially ushered in an era of dominance that would actually see them win 7 of the first 9 Premier League titles.
Now, before we wrap up, it's definitely worth noting that this season wasn't just historic for Manchester United. It was a massive, sweeping victory for the very concept of the Premier League itself. That inaugural 1992-93 season yielded an absolutely incredible 1,222 goals. That was a Premier League record that ended up standing for decades. It basically proved to the world that this new, highly funded league could absolutely deliver the sheer volume of entertainment and drama that it had promised to its shiny new global television audience. English football had truly, finally stepped out of its darkest days.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative question. Will a systemic shift in sports broadcasting ever trigger a dramatic turnaround quite like Manchester United's 1992 revolution ever again? I mean, think about it. We saw a crumbling 100-year-old system get injected with unprecedented massive TV wealth, which basically created the perfect environment for an ambitious club to end a 26-year curse and launch a global dynasty. It's this wild intersection of sports, big business, and destiny that is just truly, truly rare. I hope this explainer gave you a fantastic new perspective on exactly how the modern football world was born. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep asking those great questions.